What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another Because of Sales podcast. In this episode, we have a 10-year lead generation vet, John, who is the CEO of Level Up Leads. Level Up Leads is a sales development and appointment setting agency that runs outbound campaigns for B2B businesses. Being started during that worldwide pandemic that happened, they now have over 70 clients and 30 SDRs that work under the Level Up Leads team. So if you are looking for a pulse on what is working right now in B2B lead gen, John is going to share that in this episode. Before we get into this, I want you guys to go down, take 5 seconds. I'm going to ask you every time, go down to the first link in the description and subscribe to our free newsletter every single Wednesday, less than a 5-minute read with your coffee. Learn what's happening right now in sales, what's working, what's not working, what you should be paying attention to, what's not worth paying attention to. We just want to make sales easier. We want to make it fun, live a better life, sell more, easier. We help you do that. Go subscribe. It's free. Now into the pod. What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Because of Sales podcast. This episode, we've got John Karsant on. John, thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Dylan. Appreciate it.
So John here is the CEO of Level Up Leads. How would you describe Level Up Leads to the listener who is not familiar?
We are a sales development and appointment setting agency. So essentially, to keep it as simple as possible, companies hire us to run outbound campaigns and set up appointments for their sales team so they have more selling opportunities.
And I know we were talking previously, you have about 30 SDRs on your team that work on behalf of the clients. I think I saw on the site, you guys are also not just calling, but you are doing email, you are doing LinkedIn, you're doing all sorts of outbound methods, right?
Yeah, I think multi-channel works best. But right now, cold calling is what's working the best. So we try to push that as the number one channel to use. And then if the client wants to, we'll layer in the other channels as well.
And then all of this is B2B, just to paint a little bit more context for the listener. On your LinkedIn, you said, I don't know what you'd call this, if it's the bio, the description, but you started Level Up Leads in 2021 and you were in lead generation for 8 years prior. Kind of getting into your backstory a little bit. When it comes to lead generation, were you selling individually? Were you running teams? How did you kind of build up to starting Level Up Leads?
I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory. I used to be a tennis coach for a while, and that was great. It taught me sales in a way I didn't expect it to. But I knew I didn't want to be teaching tennis at 60. So at some point I had to rip the Band-Aid off and choose a different path. So long story short, I ended up in Argentina and I needed a remote job. I hadn't worked in front of a computer or at a typical desk job. I had been on a tennis court. So I fell into a role that was in solar lead generation. And so a company took a chance on me, and that was great. I learned a ton. So it was full sales cycle. They were a small startup in California doing solar lead generation. So that's where I really got in and started to understand the business a little bit. So that was a little unique because it was B2B sales, then B2C. So B to B to C. This is really unique to learn that field. It's different selling to people in the solar space than it is in tech. So I was there for a few years. Then I worked for a few different startups, all full sales cycle. So I really got the experience of doing my own lead gen. And this is before all the fancy tools, right? So this is when there was a sequence here, like, oh my God, this is so cool. You could actually automate these emails and you can schedule the time that you want. This is going back a little bit. So got some experience doing that, some small startups. And then before Level Leads, I worked at a different lead generation agency, a company out of Ukraine. And I worked there for 2 years alongside the CEO and got some really good experience in the B2B lead gen space. After 2 years, this is before COVID and during COVID, that's when I spun off and started Level Up Leads in 2021.
What was it that made you spin off and feel like I can do this on my own?
I honestly really wanted to be a business owner and see what that was like. I never knew I had a good idea. I felt stable enough in my life financially and where I was that I could spin off, start, get the experience, and even if I failed, I had the confidence I could go get a new job after 6 months. But I felt like it was during COVID. It was like I was sitting at home behind the computer anyways, and it just felt like a really good time to buckle down and try to learn this stuff. So I did. It was a little risky, and certainly like when I started Level Up Leads, it didn't, like I started off doing one thing and I've completely shifted and changed over the years. So I'm glad I did that. Otherwise, I don't think I'd still be in business, but that's how I originally made the shift.
In the early days of Level Up Leads, let's look at like I don't know, the first 3 to 6 months when you're delivering services to the clients that you were able to sign, did you already have a team? Did you bring a team on like from day one early on, or were you performing a lot of the services personally?
I was doing a lot of it on my own. Originally, we didn't do any cold calling, no email. It was just list building is the way I started the company. So essentially, companies say, "Oh, I have this unique ICP. It's tough to find in Apollo or Zoom Info filtering. Here's the ICP. I want you guys to go out and do it." And so they'd pay us, and I had experience doing that. And then I started the company with my wife, and then we slowly brought on some people on to help out with the filtering and actually sourcing the data. This is also a little bit before some of these tools got better over time, like in Apollo or Zoom Info. There used to be a time where there'd be like a significant lag in, let's just say you got a new job, you're at the new company, 3 months in, you go check yourself in one of these tools and you'd still be listed at the old company. They've gotten much better at this now. But at the time it was like, I could pitch it as like, look, you're paying for old data. I can go and get this person's email address and it's updated, whereas in the tools it was not. So we started doing that, but I was doing a lot of it. I was doing the sales and I was doing a lot of the delivery of it. And then as we grew, I was able to grow out the team and then remove myself from certain responsibilities.
Is your wife still involved in the business?
She is.
Cool. Does she have some sort of like lead generation background as well, or is she just down to help out?
You know, it's funny. She has a medical background. So she graduated as a doctor. But again, this was during COVID, so it's just a weird time. And so she was also working with me at my previous lead gen agency. So she had a little bit of the experience. And so she came over with me. And so she works in a different side. She does more like account management, back end stuff. It's a different part of the business. But yeah, she's still working here at Levelupdeals.
Nice. I have a kind of a similar situation. My fiance works with me in some of the sales related businesses, and she had a little bit of a sales background, but yeah, it wasn't like directly transferable. I guess in the middle of COVID, do you feel like that made it easier or harder for you to sign clients like in the earlier days?
It wasn't easy. I had a really good offer. Essentially, I was offering the service for free. I was like, hey, I'm willing to give you a free sample list, no charge. All I need is your parameters. And so it helped me get in the door a little bit. And not everyone would sign up with that, but most of them did. I'd say about half of them. And so it helped me. It's hard to say if it had something to do with the time during COVID, but it helped me get the foot in the door. I was starting to build up a little bit of a presence on LinkedIn, and then I had such some people in network that I could reach out to. So slowly over time, I was able to get some more sales.
I'm curious now, like any agency owner ever has gone through the ringer with like taking on clients that they think they can work well with. Turns out it wasn't really ideal for what you were providing. Looking back to those early days, what are some things that you found in early clients that you stay far away from now as you're like actually up and running and have a team and all that?
I'm going to shift away from list building the way the company started because just we've changed and now we're doing the actual, so it's list building, but it's also a lot more just building out the campaigns, SDR, cold calling. It was just a lot different. We're actually booking meetings. So I'm going to talk about that because there's differences there on that. What we look for is one, they have to have a certain amount of average deal size for it to be a good fit. So if a company our price can range anywhere from 5 to 10K a month, depending on the service and the channel and the volume. If a company has a really low deal size, it makes it really challenging for them to get a return on investment. So if you have $1,000 deal size and we're charging 7 or 8K, think about how many deals you need to make. Plus, that's not even your margin, right? So we would need to be making it just doesn't make sense. So what we look for is a company that has a much bigger deal size, typically 15K or plus. The bigger, the better. And then you also want to look for other things too, like do they have a presence? Do they look decent online? If we drive leads to their website, will they be able to capture them? Or does the website look like it was designed from somebody in a high school class, right? Because that also affects our work. So we're looking at other variables too, and then product market fit. Like, what's the competition like? Do they stand out? Have they been around for a while? Do they have funding? Things like that. So it's not one particular thing, but we're looking to see, all right, using a company like ours, will this make sense? Another thing I would say is we will ask, have you done outbound before? Because if they haven't, then they really don't know what to expect. Because if they've never done it, we've never done it, then how can you set some KPIs around it if you've never done it before? So we'll ask those types of questions. Ideally, they have something in place, or they have done something in the past. Or what's great is they already have an SDR internally, and we work alongside them. So they already have some type of baseline that we can work off of, and so we're not guessing on what the KPI should be.
The average company that is coming to work with you guys, there's probably maybe a few reasons, but besides just, hey, more leads, more business, do you see them coming to you for like a fast solution to stand up? Do you see them coming because they have absolutely no idea how to generate leads? Like what are most of these companies hoping to get from the relationship?
It's a great question, and it's typically all the above, which we have to figure out. Some will be, hey, I'm a European company. We want to break into the US market, but we don't really want to hire, and we're just not sure how the market's going to react. We would rather outsource that to start and see what the results will be like. So that's an option. The other option is they're pretty new. They got some funding. They're trying to break into some new markets. So they'll use us to test that out. Yeah, I mean, ideally they have a sense of their ICP and they know who to target, but sometimes they don't. What you just really have to do your best job to set expectations to what to get out of the engagement. Because if you don't, everyone's going to expect something a lot higher than what's realistic. And so unfortunately with SDRs, it's a tough space. Like SDRs don't have the highest retention rate. They're typically the first ones to get cut. And for us, since we fall into that category, we have to do a good job of setting expectations and making sure we're bringing on the right types of clients. Otherwise, that could end up backfiring on us.
So are the SDRs technically under your umbrella, or do you staff them with the company and just oversee them and provide them with what they need?
They're under our umbrella. So we have SDR managers. We have 2 of them, and then we have several other people all under Level Up Leads. So if they hire us, they're hiring the team of people, not just the SDR.
Do you have people, because I've seen people do this before and it can work in some circumstances and not work in others, but like, do you have people who would work on potentially multiple accounts based on the workload that's necessary?
We have something called a fractional SDR model. So it should be pretty obvious that they're not just doing one account. So they should know when they sign up for that. Now, we also have some SDRs, like it's a little bit like depending on how much workload they're willing to take on. So we may have a SDR who has a side business, but they're trying to get the business off the ground. They also need some type of stable income. So they'll do both. So they're not willing to take on a bunch of work. They're like, hey, I'm willing to work 4 hours a day. And that way we have that set up and then we can allocate them to the right project, or we're not setting them up with a client that needs more than that.
Yeah, I'm curious too, because you guys obviously have this like systematized approach of, sign a client, deploy the system, operate the system. But with the SDR, is it like a traditional, there's a fractional component, but like a traditional SDR in a W2 company, they're going to be doing a little bit more than just pressing go on the dialer. Do you guys internally have systems in place to basically put everything in front of the SDRs and it's like, hey, you just man this? Or are your fractional SDRs like going through the whole list building process and doing all that in addition to dialing?
Purposely, by design, we set it up so the SDR is only focused on one thing, which is dialing. So we have other people in place on the team, which is all included in the pricing, to take care of the list building, to take care of the emailing, or to respond to certain things. So it's hard if you're an SDR. It's happened to me. It's happened to other people that I'm friendly with. You're an SDR. You're required to. I'm just going to make something up. You're required to make 100 dials a day, but then you get stuck in meetings, and then you're doing stuff in the CRM, and then you're listening into a meeting that you already set with the AE, and so you end up all of a sudden you're not making what you're being paid to do. So what I designed the company and this role is that they're just focused on dialing. Now there's some little back end things, right? Some little admin work. We have a dashboard. They need to update things or upload the recording so the client can see. But by design, it's, hey, I want them focused on dialing and focused on the delivery and the script and really getting that down.
Yeah, I'm curious what that looks like kind of internally, where you have something built to where the SDR can just dial and focus on dialing, but like you have a conversation with a client, maybe it's regularly, maybe it's one time, whatever, you identify like, okay, this is who we need to go after, this is why we need to go after them, and you kind of get that idea. But then like, how does that kind of go through the team to eventually have the SDR just press start on the dialer? Like, do you have people in place that interpret this different ways to get this ready, or what does that process look like for you guys?
So the question is like, if the client's saying one thing, how does that get relayed to the SDR?
Yeah, like so this, like clients, like we want to go after them, SDRs dialing, like how does that come together in the middle?
So one is we'll create a script, but the client needs to approve it. So we will create it. Sometimes, very rare cases, the client will have one already, but we will create the script, but they need to add their 2 cents and ultimately sign off on it. And then we will go and practice that on an AI training bot. And then we have a training call with the client so we can ask them questions, or really the SDR can ask them questions. And then they'll go out and start making those dials. If there's a change, one, they're typically a part of that meeting. And if they're not, we record the calls and then we can pass that over. That a change could be, again, that would, if it's drastic, that would again need to be approved by the client. If it's something small like, hey, just make sure you ask this question at a certain point of the script, then we just add that in.
A big thing that I love to talk about on here is just how different sales teams and businesses are using AI. You mentioned an AI training bot. Is that something that you guys built, or is it another software that you use?
I wish, we pay for it. It's actually really helpful. It's just think about it. If I were to be in an SDR's position and I was handed a new client, a new script, yeah, I could practice in front of the mirror, kind of go rock through things on my own, but you're really not getting that real practice until you start making dials. And this just allows you to practice with somebody, and it's not a real client. You can get that practice in, and then what's cool is if they stumble, they can go back to the client and say, hey, actually, I was getting this objection. How would you typically handle this? So it's a really nice add-on.
Interesting. How in touch with the client are the SDRs? Because I'm pretty familiar with the model, and the way that I've done it previously in different niche, obviously it's a different space, but some of the business owners were a little bit more involved with the sales team. Maybe it was a more technical product. They had more free time. Some of the business owners didn't even want to know their names. How do you handle that dynamic? And what do you see is pretty common with your clients?
So sometimes the person we make the sale with at the company isn't the person we're talking to on a regular basis. What we try to do is get every client into Slack. So that's roughly 70 or 80% of our clients will do that, whether they're using it already or we get them to. And then there's another portion where it's like, hey, we're on Teams, or we don't use anything. It's got to use email. But the idea is that the SDR can communicate directly with the client, because it'd be like, hey, on how to call, person wants to book a meeting, but your calendar is not open. Can you open it up a little bit more? Or it says they were only open this day and this time and you weren't open. Are you by chance free? So there's just like, there needs to be that communication directly with them. And then also just following up, hey, did that meeting show? Like, if not, we'll track them down and try to get them to reschedule. So we like to have that direct communication with specifically the person we're setting the meetings for, so we know that they're quality meetings that are being booked.
All right, guys. So quick break for the sponsor of this podcast. It is the Serial Sales Community. Who would have known? If you are in the market for a quality 1099 remote appointment setting or closing role, you're a sales rep who's tired of the in-person grind, you're tired of the commute, you're tired of the soul-sucking quotas, you're tired of all the managers and the managers and the meetings where you're not selling, but you're in these meetings where you should be selling. A lot of that stuff doesn't exist in the remote 1099 setting or closing space. If you are interested in that, we put a focus on sharing quality opportunities, and we shared 353 in July, and we share about that much every single month. So sales training doesn't get you hired. Focusing on the things that gets you hired does. And in this kind of underground remote closing and setting model, you're not going to find these jobs on LinkedIn. You're not going to find them on Indeed, Glassdoor, all that. You find them in the Serial Sales Community. If you go down to the second link in the description, you will find a link to learn some more, to book a call with the team if that interests you. Mention Because of Sales will give you 5% off any package you choose. Back to the pod. You said earlier that some of these clients, or I asked, like, what are the reasons that clients hire you? And you said a combination of oftentimes all of the above. One of those reasons was they don't even know who they should be going after. I'm curious, like, with your average client, let's say they have an idea of who they probably want to go after, but maybe you guys have just like been around the block to where you're like, based on everything that we're seeing, it actually might make more sense to target like this kind of person. I'm curious how you guys handle those conversations. And if it ever comes down to like business owners telling us to do this thing that we know isn't really going to work like they think, do we just do it and show them that it didn't work? Or like, how do you handle that?
That's a tough one. There's two circumstances there. There's one where they don't know and they're open to adjusting it based on what we're suggesting. A common one would be they fill out their ICP form and they list like 8 different C-level execs. And you're like, look, we're not running that same message out and targeting all these people the same way. Like, we have to narrow this down a little bit, and they're fine with that. And that also just lowering that down to VP or director level. And then you also sometimes will get the client that just at the end of the day, they need to have the last word. And regardless of what you say or data you show them, they want it to be done their way. So it's something you just have to feel out. It's hard to say, hey, this is the SOP on how to deal with the situation, because there is nothing. You kind of have to feel it out. Like, maybe there's some sense to it. Maybe they made some sales that way. You could always, what I tell the team is you could always suggest do it their way and test our way. And so you do both side by side. I wish there was a more straight answer, but at the end of the day, they're hiring you to do a job. And so you have to use your best judgment on how you go about that.
I think it, the way that you're charging the client also probably is a huge factor, because we haven't got into it and we don't have to get into crazy detail, but I'd assume you guys probably do some form of like retainer and revenue share probably, right?
Just retainer.
Just retainer. Okay, cool. So like even that alone, if you were just retainer or just rev share, it incentivizes you different ways, because if the client is clearly a little bit naive to what is possible, and they're telling you do this, do this, do this, but if you're only rev share, it's like, we're actually going to lose money by doing that. Like, we don't want to do that. So retainer definitely helps a lot. I want to shift into kind of talking to the SDRs. There's definitely going to be some SDRs watching this. They're pretty difficult to manage. It's not too hard to find decent ones, but it can be hard to find great ones. The best SDRs on your team, like what are some of the commonalities between them, and how do you use that to go and try to find more SDRs like that?
Yeah, it's a challenge because they could come from various different backgrounds and all be good or be bad. It's very challenging. One thing we started doing was mock calls. That's been really helpful. Also, we won't consider applicants unless they submit a video and their LinkedIn profile or resume. So it just helps weed through a little bit, but the mock call has been really helpful. And then from there, we run them through, like there's a training, but then also they need to start calling for level up leads. And so we can listen and do some coaching before we put them on a client. So there's some checkpoints along the way that they need to graduate through before we're actually putting them on a client. Really what we're looking for though is some type of grit. Like if there's a minimum call volume, are they just doing the minimum call volume and then signing off for the day? Or are they really looking to book meetings regardless of the call volume? Right? Are they really in it? And we incentivize them this way. It's on a retention basis that the SDRs they're getting bonuses based off of retention, not off of certain calls made. But yeah, it's hard. The other one I would look for is like some type of competitiveness, like if they have a sports background or they've done it before. Cold calling is a lot different than a designer, right? So you want them to have some type of experience is typically a good thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, sales experience aside, are there other experiences that you look for, such as an athletic background? There's some others that come to mind for me. Are there any others for you guys that if you see, you're like, this is interesting, this could work if they're the right person, right personality?
You know what's interesting is a company I'm talking with on a friendly basis. Yeah, I also went on his podcast, his service is personality testing. And so they run you through these personality tests. And so you get a sense on what your personality types are. And what's cool is we can now look at that and try to pick up on any common threads between the good SDRs versus the bad SDRs. But that's a work in progress and that's new. But I just felt like that's kind of cool to try to see what type of commonalities you can see there and the personality traits.
I've seen that. I actually recorded a podcast yesterday with a guy who runs a sales agency more in the like inbound space. And he said that 17 of his 20 top appointment setters all fell within the same range of like a certain personality. And so now the second step on his application is a personality test. And if they don't meet a certain criteria, they're kind of like automatically sorted out. It doesn't mean they're like totally out of the picture, but he said that. And then I've seen other people as well, like pretty large names that have big sales teams. The first entry level like interview, or I guess, I don't know what you'd call it. The first step in their interview process is a behavioral test. Like they don't even ask you for your resume. They don't ask for your sales experience. It's like, take this test. If you're a good fit, then we'll ask for your stuff, which is super interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like, for example, coachability, that's another one I didn't talk about, is like, can you be coached and will you listen and will you implement, versus someone who maybe has some experience but feels like they know it all and not willing to take either our suggestions or the clients. So that's also something to consider.
Yeah, well, you mentioned way earlier that, I don't know if this was like a hypothetical or if this is something that's on your team, but if you had an SDR who has like their own business, for example, obviously their time is split, but it's like a fractional role, and that's totally cool if it works. You know, a lot of these companies, they love to get people straight out of college, like catch them early, train them right. Do you have a preference on that? Or I mean, as long as they have the time and the skill, you're down to give them a shot?
The way I look at this scenario where someone has something else on the side is they typically are going to have better business acumen and they can handle conversations better. If they're running their own business, they are just more aware of how to navigate a conversation, and you're likely going to get better talent. Now, that's not always going to be the case. There's some downsides to that too. You're going to, by the way, for anyone listening, this is a small portion of our SDRs, but we do have some. But you're likely getting better talent too. Just yeah. Then for the full-time people that are just doing this full-time, it ranges all over the place. Like we have people that are in their early 20s, and we also have people in their 50s. So in terms of age and experience, it's all over the map. What we look for is, do they have a family? Like is something keeping them here that they will be responsible? Do they have a family? Do they have kids? Do they live in one place, or are they constantly moving around all over the place? Like those are some of the other things we're looking for.
Yeah, the digital nomad types are pretty tough to employ. Do you guys have like an internal recruiting engine, or do you work with any third-party people to get applicants, or how do you really get the bulk of the applicants here?
I personally like doing it in-house. It just gives us more control of the process. Sometimes we get into crunches where, like, if a client comes to us and says, "Hey, we want 4 SDRs," well, I don't have 4 SDRs all the time just sitting around. So sometimes you're like, and they want it like right away, right? So you kind of are in a little bit of a crunch. There are some marketplaces out there that have people that you can choose. They have training, they have videos just ready to go, and so you can pick them and interview them very quick and bring them on board. But I really try to refrain against doing that, just because I want to have all of them on the same pay schedule. I want them to have run through our onboarding process. Occasionally, though, I will for the SDR role.
I've spoken to quite a few people. Again, everyone runs their business in their own way. Doesn't mean like one way is right or wrong, but I know some people that will run fractional teams similar to what you do. And some of them are really good about like bringing the different teams together and creating a team environment, like one big team environment. Or other ones, it's like this team over here doesn't even know this team over here exists. How do you guys manage that?
One thing I noticed at one of my previous companies, the other 8 lead gen agencies, we had like 70 or 80 people, but I felt like everyone was working on an island. No one knew each other. There was nothing uniting the team. And so as Level Up Leads grew, that was one thing I tried to implement, and we did. So the way we broke it out is, as our SDR count grew, I was like, this is just getting too big to the point where I can't be in these calls regularly. I started having to hire more people, and by the time I think we hit 20 SDRs, right now we're about 40. By the time we hit 20, what we did is we broke them off into teams, and each SDR team had a team lead. And then every month they compete against each other, friendly competition for the most meetings booked. And whichever team gets the most meetings booked gets a cash prize. So now I think there's either 5 or 6 teams right now, all competing against each other every month. And then the other cool thing is we have a channel in Slack that everyone posts for every meeting they book every day. So it's kind of like so rather than just working on your own, it's like, oh man, Jimmy booked a meeting, Kevin booked a meeting. And so like you can see that, and it's hopefully motivating to each other.
Well, that's super good. Like dopamine for the entire team, just like multiple messages going through.
Some of the tools now, this didn't exist before, but we use Orem in their sales floor. So you can actually listen to your colleagues on the phone and hopefully pick up some tips. So that's another cool thing.
You guys are all focused on SDRs, right? Like you're not doing fractional account executive work, are you?
No.
Okay.
There's some clients that want that, but we have found it challenging to build out the comp structure across multiple companies. So occasionally we'll explore those conversations and see how we can make that make sense. But to standardize that, when one AE might have a sales cycle of 1 month and another one might have one of 1 year, it's just very difficult to build out fairly.
Yeah. And so I guess like with the sales cycle, any sales role, like these people are incentivized for an actual closed deal. Yeah, they're incentivized to book meetings, but they're sometimes incentivized to close deals as well, even at the SDR level. Comp structure wise, again, don't have to get into crazy detail, but do you guys do a combination of like retainer and then pay per meeting, or does that look different based on the client and like the frequency of the meetings? How do you guys go about building those out for the SDRs?
For the SDRs specifically, or the way we build a clients?
For the SDRs on your team.
So they have a base plus commission based off retention. And then they have basically if they're working for one client, or they're working, because we have different packages based off volume. So I'm just going to simplify. Higher volume is A, lower volume is B. Based off the package, they'll get a higher base salary if they're having to make double the amount of calls versus the other client that is asking for half the amount of calls. So they have base salaries allocated to the package.
I'm curious, what's one thing that, because you've been at it for 4 years, at least
Yeah.
more than 4, right?
Yep.
There's always a ton of trial and error, especially as an agency owner. What's one thing that you pursued for a long time that you thought was really going to change the game that you ended up like abandoning, or it didn't work like you thought it would, or something along those lines?
One thing we tried to implement on our own was SEO. So we started building out an in-house team for that. We got a few clients and quickly realized this isn't going to work. So now we will pass it along to other companies. The reason for that is what we found as a challenge is when we're on sales calls, what we tend to talk about is our main packages of selling SDRs and appointment setting, and the SEO ended up just not really getting discussed. So here we are, we had the team, and occasionally would be like add-ons, but we found it was just, maybe we just need to stick with it longer, but there's other SEO companies out there that could deliver a better service than we could on the SEO front, and we weren't discussing it. So we ended up having to cut that whole department, and we just continue to focus on what we do best is the appointment setting.
Have you come into circumstances, and I'm sure you have, but where you get on a call with a prospect, a company that's looking to expand their outbound team, but they're like, yeah, John, I just want to like recruit someone from you. Like, I don't really need the long-term thing. Or they're just like, I already have a team. I just want you to run it. I'm sure you run into those. How do you navigate those? Do you guys like break up your service on demand, or how do you go about that?
So we want to keep our SDRs in-house. We do put a lot of work into training them and hiring them. And ideally, if we're doing that and then letting them go to other companies, we're just constantly in that cycle. And it's hiring any position, let alone SDRs, is not fun. So yeah, that does come up. Clients will want that. What we typically will say is, hey, let's start off with our normal service. Let's see how it goes. And then after the end of the engagement, and if you're happy, then we could talk about a buyout. And so we have a buyout clause in the contract, but it rarely happens. Typically, if we're doing a good job, why would they want to bring it in-house if they can do it cheaper and be able to cut ties much easier using an agency like ours than having to bring it in-house? And then you're going to have to start working on getting all the tech stack set up and managing it. So it's a no-brainer to outsource it if it's working.
Well, you mentioned the tech stack. So you guys house the SDRs, you house the tech. So it truly is plug and play, but like how long from contract signed, first invoice paid to dials being made, how long is that time frame usually?
Yeah, so we do have everything included. It is plug and play, but that doesn't mean we're just going to launch without getting the chance to know everything, the ins and outs, to set ourselves up for success. One thing we changed, this is probably about, I want to say 6 months ago, we stopped charging for onboarding. We felt like it was rushing the client a little bit, and sometimes the client wouldn't respond. They're like, hey, actually, I'm on vacation. And so like, here we are, we've started, but then it would just delay out, and then it ended up hurting us in the long run. So what we ended up doing was just removing the charge of onboarding. So the day we launch is the day their billing cycle starts. But to answer your question directly, it's typically about 1 to 2 weeks, that onboarding time. From the day we have our onboarding call to actually launching, yeah, probably closer to 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's super interesting that you got rid of the onboarding, because I see a lot of businesses do the opposite because they have an experience where, hey, we invested time and resources into this, like our team's time and resources didn't get paid, and then it fell through for one reason or the next. And then you're just sitting there like you lost money, you lost time. So, I mean, did you ever experience that at all? Or
yeah, so it's a hit up front for us. But what we ended up with, I'm in this for the long run. I'm not trying to churn through clients. What we ended up finding was you end up going back. A client says, let's just use a 3-month window as an example. And they're judging results off of 3 months. Well, really, it's not 3 months because it took 2 weeks or whatever. So they're now judging their total spend off of what really wasn't even the amount of time that we were launched. So when they're going back where they're trying to get internal approval to continue, they're judging it off of the entire 3 months when really we were only, I'll just make it up, only live for 2.5 months. So it just was shooting us in the foot when we're trying to get renewals going. So it's like, if we had 2 extra weeks, could we set that 1 extra meeting or 2 extra meetings that made the difference? Maybe. So that's the way we are approaching it.
yeah, I was gonna kind of like zoom out a little bit and talk about just like lead generation as a whole. Like there's so many companies out there that do lead generation. You guys are specifically, you do a little bit of everything, but your bread and butter is cold calling. If I'm a business owner, I raise some money and I'm like, I want to go outbound and sell more stuff. what is the selling point on working with you guys who are like a little bit more cold call heavy than someone who's just going to like blast cold email and put a VA in the inbox, or grab some LinkedIn accounts from somewhere and like start ripping it that way? So what's the unique selling point for you guys?
Well, I wish the email LinkedIn route worked better because then I'd do it. It's a lot cheaper to do. I don't have to hire all these SDRs and a lot less people to manage, but unfortunately that stopped working. Now, I don't want to say completely, it still can work and it still can drive leads and act as an additional touch point to your overall lead gen campaigns. But the reason why we've shifted towards cold calling is because in the scenario you gave, someone just got some funding, they're new to the market, or maybe they're developing their product. The easiest way to understand which direction to go and get market feedback is to talk to somebody. If I send out an email and no one responds, it doesn't teach me anything, or you get very little response. They're not going to necessarily answer your questions in depth. So on a phone call, they may not be interested, but you can at least grab them for a minute and be like, hey, by the way, okay, cool, you're using competitor X. Well, how come you're really happy with them? I'd love to know what keeps you with them. How can we improve, or stuff like that. And so it's immediate feedback that we can get and bring back to the client. Hey, these types of titles aren't resonating. They say they're not handling this internally. We should probably get rid of that title in our targeting. So that's why we push cold calling, is we can pivot much quicker and get going down the right road much faster.
That makes sense. Have you seen there's this iOS update coming that is supposed to, similar to like Google Android, they have this like AI screening thing coming out. Have you seen that?
I have. Is it rolled out yet, or has it just been talked about?
Not yet, but I'm curious like what your thoughts are around that, given you guys do a lot of cold calling.
Yeah, not worried about it. Simple as that. I mean, people answer their phones. They're not going to read every single one. I started answering my phone more recently, which is bizarre. But I find I was like, oh, this is actually an important phone call. I'm glad I answered this. Doesn't mean I don't get some random calls, but no, I'm not worried. I still think the phone is still a good method of communication. I still think people will answer. Like I still answer, and I have a Google Voice number, and that screens people. It says you are receiving a call from, and then they have to say their name. And even though I don't know it, I still will like push them through because it might be something important. The people you've been talking to, what has their feedback been on that new release?
I don't know what the date is on that, but a lot of the people that I'm talking to recently, a lot of them are not in the like total cold call space. They're calling like opt-in style leads. A little bit different, but yeah, I mean, in what you're doing, like cold calling, I feel like it's just so much, or like calling is so much more heavy. And in the opt-in space, they opt in with name, number, email. It's like you have the omni-channel approach there, and you can like drip campaigns out. So it's not as much of like a sweat, I guess, or it hasn't been for them. We talked about AI a little bit. You mentioned you will train the SDRs, have them drill with a call review AI, or like an interactive training AI. But I'm curious, like what other use cases you're implementing as far as AI into your agency? Like it seems like everybody's talking about it, and there's some really common ones, but I'm curious if there's anything you guys are doing with AI, whether that's like client facing or internal, that's like really making a difference for you right now.
So a lot of the tools have AI functionalities. So for example, the dialer will give you an AI call summary. Not always the best, but does a decent job. What we found though is to trust the SDR to give a good summary of the day or a particular calling session hasn't always been the best. So you can get the individual call summary, but to get the summary of all the calls was a bit of a challenge. So what we're starting to do is pull the transcripts of all the calls that were made in a particular session and then summarize all those using AI. And so that gives us a much better summary and gives the team, the customer success manager, who can ultimately pass that to the client. Hey, this is the consensus of what we're seeing. And then you can compile that too, right, off of multiple days. This is the consensus of what we're seeing on the campaigns, good or bad. And so that gives us a much better, much more direct and accurate summary that we can then give to the client. So that's one of the cool things.
Is that a process that's heavily automated, or are there some manual steps in there?
Yeah, it's automated. You have to pull the transcripts. We're working on that with sometimes like for example, with Orem, you can get it off of one call, but to get it off multiple is a little tricky. But they just opened up the webhooks. So we're working on that. Yeah. And it's all automated and depends on the prompts too. If you're running that through ChatGPT, what prompts you give it will depend on what the output is.
I don't know if you're using like a standalone dialer or through a CRM, but do you have it to where like all the call recordings would be, you'd have like all your entire Level Up Leads calls in like one call recording database, or is it broken up into like separate accounts for separate businesses?
So it's all under Level Up Leads. We have our own account within Orem. Another tool we use is called Trellis. It's another dialer that sits on top of CRMs, which is really nice when that's the requirement. And then, yeah, it's stored all within our account. So we can go pull those based off of the lister client. And so we can search and then find all the call recordings by day, by hour, by client.
Yeah. I'm curious, like if there is someone who is scrolling on social media and they're like, oh, shoot, John went on this podcast and talked about his business. Maybe they are really interested in what you do. Imagine we're talking to that person right now who's like, I know John is great at SDR appointment setting. What do you think that person would be most interested to hear about what you guys do? Or like, what's like a cool nugget that you can share with someone who might specifically be interested in like learning more about how you guys operate?
I think one of the cool things is we've worked with a lot of different companies. So right now we have a little over 70 clients live, and then you can got to think about the companies that we've worked with in the past. And so we have a large data set of and we've also just the experience of what's working, what's not working, and then we can go and apply that to our clients in something they might not have ever considered. It could be an approach, could be something in messaging. And so you can apply those things. And I think that's one of the unique things we bring to the table. Maybe you hire someone that's really good in sales, but they've worked at 2 or 3 different companies. Like at any given time, we just are working with so many different companies that we have a lot of different data to, oh yeah, we did that with that company. Here's what worked, or here's what didn't work. It's pretty similar to what you're trying to do. And they might not have that experience because maybe they're new to the company or maybe the product's fairly new.
Honestly, I didn't even know you got, I mean, 70 that's a lot of data, and you probably see it. I mean, it's not like you're reinventing the wheel every week, every month with what you're doing, but like if you find something working really well on one account, I mean, you're probably pushing it to the others pretty quick, right?
Yeah, it's pretty rare you have someone that like are so identical. It's extremely rare, but you will get people in the same space. So I'll just use an example like custom software development companies. There's a lot of them out there, but they'll be like, oh, we only focus on financial services, whereas someone else is maybe an industry agnostic, but there is some crossover.
Being a sales manager, sales director for one company can be a full-time job. It is a lot of times a full-time job. You guys have like 70 clients going. How do you find the time? And, yes, you have a team. Obviously, you have a team, but like find the time to properly pay each account the attention that it needs as far as like rolling up the sleeves and making sure that you're not just like maintaining, but you're continuously pushing for growth. How do you manage that?
Just from experience, you get a sense of, and plus at one point I was doing all these jobs myself and I knew where I got maxed out and I needed to hire somebody. And then from there over time, we've taken from me doing a bunch of different roles to just sectioning them off to, okay, you have this role is responsible for these things, right? So like we know a customer success manager, we want them managing about 10 to 15 clients, give or take at a time. And so you can then hire based off of that. Once they start pushing that 15 limit, they probably are starting to let some things fall through the cracks. So you need to get somebody else in place or even out the balance of how many clients they're taking on. So I think it's just over time adjusting to what we've seen and also feedback was, hey, by the way, do you feel maxed out? Can you take on more work? Like what's that sweet spot for each person and each responsibility?
What's one thing that you're looking at right now or you've maybe heard of that you're interested in and potentially looking to implement to kind of take the client work to the next level?
There's a tool we're testing out called Octave, which is really cool. I haven't dug into it that much, but I get the concept of how it works. And it's very in depth on building out different personas and different messagings to the persona and then playbooks on top of that, which then you can then deliver to the client. So we're in the early stages of testing that, but it's very good. That's one thing we're working on. Octave, Octave. I could double check this.
I don't know if it's coming up on the search to like a dot.
Octave HQ, Octave.
Okay, cool. Nice. I'll have to check this out. What's the big vision with Level Up Leads? Like if you look down the road, I could ask you this question. You're like, dude, I wanted to sell this yesterday. I wanted to get out yesterday. But assuming that's not the answer, like what is the big vision, a year, 3 years, 5 years down the line with the business?
Yeah, at some point I'd like to sell, but every time I'll say, oh yeah, next year I'll consider that. And then that year comes and I just, hell yeah, next year I'll consider that. And so I'm in that again. Yeah, next year I'll consider that. So at this point, things are going pretty well. I'm not ready to do that. It's a long-term plan, but right now I'm just enjoying the ride. And it's a changing space. It's something that every company, not every company, but a lot of companies need. It's a painful thing to do in-house. I actually just wrote an ebook on the topic of hiring SDRs in-house and like the common blind spots people don't see in what it takes to spin up an SDR function. And just to give you a quick, I mean, you probably know this already, but just the simple management and data stack and paying for all that. And then if the SDR doesn't work out, you're stuck with all that, yet no SDR. And then you got to go through the hiring process again. So there's a lot of hidden costs. So that's why I think it's a high need, but it's also, unfortunately, I wish we could all make this better, but the SDR space, whether it's in-house or external, it doesn't typically last more than a year. A lot of companies want them. A lot of companies don't want them. There's a lot of people going in and out.
I guess kind of looking at all of this holistically, like going even back to the solar days, you've been in the sales and lead generation and even marketing space, if you want to call it, for about 10 years now, maybe a little bit more than 10 years. The name of this podcast, Because of Sales, a big part of what we're trying to do is trying to provide insight to give people perspective so they can do more, get better, and just gain more leverage out of the opportunity they have, which I think we got into some cool stuff on here. But can you talk about your life because of sales, like learning the skill, being able to build on top of the skill and then get yourself in a position of leverage? What can you attribute in your life to that skill and building on top of it?
Well, I think it started back when I mentioned about tennis, and it's just natural. If someone said, oh, what do you do for a job? I was, oh, I'm a tennis coach. But there's a selling aspect to that people don't realize, that you give a lesson, people are paying you for that. And you have to do a good enough job for someone to want to come back. And what do? You have to deliver a service, and you have to deliver typically what you want is knowledge, fun, and fitness in every lesson. And then there's somebody wants more of one than the other. Some might want a bunch of fun, but he doesn't really care that much. What's important is learning what each individual person wants. And so that has carried over to sales and understanding, what do your customers want? What's important to them? If I'm feature dropping or talking about something that's not important to them, well, they may not want to work with me. Right. So how do I understand what's important to them and then start talking about that? And it's really taught me, like, understanding and been in sales, and I think full sales cycle specifically has taught me a lot. Now, it wasn't that fun at the time because you're just doing a bunch of jobs, you're wearing a bunch of hats and you're doing everything, but it taught me how to essentially get the business off the ground because I had done a lot of these things already. And it's helped me in higher leverage like when I'm having conversations with more senior people, how to navigate those conversations, knowing what's important to them, knowing my seat at the table, meaning what leverage do I have versus what leverage do they have in negotiating contracts and different things like that. Because you're going to get to a point where someone says, oh, we only do net 30 and we do prepay. So you're sitting there, how do you negotiate moving forward with differences in how you work? So yeah, there's a long-winded answer, but it's taught me a lot in how to navigate, get the company off the ground, but also how to navigate important conversations.
How much do you think the skill of sales and, everything you learned because you pursued that is helping you now in like more of a leadership position?
I think understanding and putting yourself in the other person's shoes is really important. You need to know how to do that in sales, and you need to know how to do that in a leadership role. What is important to them as let's say, an employee? Are they interested in growing within the company? Are they interested in recognition? What's important to them? Maybe they're saving up to buy a car. And so you can keep going back to that and showing them how this role is helping them get there or whatnot. I think just putting myself in their shoes and what's important to them has helped me become a better leader.
Anything else you wanted to dive into, or anything you think that would be cool for the listener who's sales rep or business owner but wants to sell more to hear before we wrap this one up?
I would say, as an important thing, if you're thinking about hiring an SDR or some type of SDR under the umbrella of an SDR, do it yourself first, or have somebody on your team do it. Don't expect to hire an SDR and for them to figure it out. You're going to end up wasting your money and your time. It's just not realistic. Or if you're going to do that, give them 8 months to a year to figure it out. And I think that's a common mistake I see is people they need more sales, they need more meetings. They've never done it before. I'm going to hire an SDR. But if they don't have guardrails in place, How are you expecting a somewhat junior level person to come in and do that all for you?
Question for you. You probably know a handful of people that do what you do or similar, maybe more than a handful. Other people that are outsourcing, running like fractional SDR teams for businesses. What is like the biggest thing that you see those people doing wrong or something that they could improve upon a lot?
So my competitors or my
Yeah.
clients?
Like I'm kind of trying to give the alley oop, like, why are you better than the competitors? And turn it into a learning lesson.
Not over promising, being okay, because that's, I think, what a lot of lead gen companies do. A lot of the ones that offer pay per meetings is because they're unestablished and don't have the credibility to offer the retainer, right? I have case studies and whatnot to point to of publicly traded companies, whereas they don't. And so being okay, if someone doesn't, if that someone seems like they're going to be a disaster to work with, being okay with walking away or explaining, hey, your expectations are way out of line of what we typically see. So miracles are going to need to happen if this is going to work. And being able to call it out up front, having those calls recorded so you can point back to them if it comes up down the road, but just being able to evaluate the client rather than taking on anybody and everybody.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, cool. I'm going to link everything below that we have, but can you let people know where to find you if they want to either just connect with you or hire you guys?
The best place is LinkedIn, John Karsant. I'm pretty active there. I try to post once a day, or you could check out the website, levelupdeals.ai.
Awesome. Well, it was good having you. Good to kind of learn a little bit more alpha on the fractional SDR model. If you guys listen to this and you like it, go connect with John. Seems to know what he's doing. So appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks for having me on, Dylan. Appreciate it.
All right, you guys, that was the episode with John. If you want to connect with John, whether you want to hire him or you want to work with him, go down below. You'll find all of his links in the description of this video. And if you didn't learn what it's like right now to run multiple SDR teams and to hire SDRs and do outbound for B2B businesses through cold calls through this episode, I don't really know where else you're going to learn it from. So go show John some love. And my last ask of you guys is just subscribe to our free newsletter. Again, it's free. We help you sell more. We help you do it easier so you can enjoy the life on the other side of doing all that. Every Wednesday morning with your coffee, less than a 5-minute read, get the high points of all these podcast interviews and some recent news, tools, tricks, and tips, and some memes on selling, what selling is like in 2025. So thank you guys for watching. Go subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you next week.